Mah. 43 years of living taught me one thing. The most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in love. I built my surgical practice from nothing. Not from family money. Not from connections. From 14-hour days. From sleeping in hospital break rooms during residency. From saying no to every shortcut that crossed my path. By the time I turned 43, my name was on the door of a practice that handled some of the most complex reconstructive cases in the Southeast. Patients flew in from other states. Colleagues called me for second opinions. My reputation was the one thing in my life I had never once compromised. My marriage was supposed to be the same story. 17 years with my wife. We met when I was still a resident and she was finishing her MBA. Sharp, driven, beautiful in that way that made you feel chosen just by being near her. We built something real, or so I believed. A house in the kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways. 2 dogs. A life that, from the outside, looked like the definition of everything going right. I should have looked harder at what was happening on the inside. The first thing I noticed wasn't dramatic. It never is. It was a Tuesday evening in late February. My wife came home from what she described as a client dinner, kissed me on the cheek the way you kiss a piece of furniture, and went straight upstairs to shower. I was finishing the last of a cold cup of coffee at the kitchen counter, half reading a journal article on my tablet. When she walked through to grab a glass of water afterward, something stopped me cold. A scent. Faint, but unmistakable. Not perfume, cologne. Expensive. The kind with a low, woody base that clings to fabric rather than skin. I knew every product in our house. That one didn't belong there. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being irrational. She had just showered. Whatever it was must have been clinging to the coat she'd draped over the bar stool before going upstairs. I told myself that for 3 weeks. I'm good at telling myself things. But I started paying attention in the way I never had before. The way she tilted her phone screen when I walked into her room. The way she laughed differently on certain calls. Lighter, younger somehow, like she was performing a version of herself I hadn't seen in years. The way she mentioned his name, my colleague, a man I'd known for 6 years, a vascular surgeon at the same hospital network where I held privileges, a man whose daughter had been in my daughter's dance recital 2 springs ago. His name started appearing in her stories, the way background music appears in a scene. You don't notice it the first few times, and then suddenly you can't unhear it. I'm a surgeon. I deal in precision and evidence. I don't operate on assumptions. So instead of confronting her with nothing, I did what the methodical part of my brain demanded. I hired a private investigator, a former federal agent named Marcus, who came recommended through a divorce attorney I'd spoken to quietly. Once, just to understand my options, I told Marcus I needed the truth, whatever it was. And I told him I needed it clean. No drama, no shortcuts, just facts. It took him 11 days. The documentation he brought me was thorough in the way that only makes things worse. Photographs, timestamps, a hotel name I recognized. 40 minutes from our house, the kind of place with a valet and a rooftop bar, nice enough to feel like it meant something. 14 confirmed meetings over 5 months. The most recent was 4 days before I was sitting across from Marcus in a coffee shop, looking at a folder I wish I had never asked for. I thanked him, paid him, and sat in my car for 45 minutes before I could drive. I want to be honest about what I felt in that parking lot, because it wasn't just anger. It was something more disorienting. A kind of retroactive vertigo, like looking back at a photograph of yourself and realizing the ground you were standing on was never solid. 17 years. Every anniversary dinner. Every argument we worked through. Every quiet Sunday morning. All of it suddenly had a question mark hanging over it. How long had she been capable of this? How long had I been the last to know? I didn't confront her. Not then. I had learned, in surgery, that the worst outcomes come from acting in the acute phase of shock. You stabilize first, you assess, then you act with intention. What I hadn't expected was that the situation would change entirely before I ever got to the confrontation I'd been planning. Her name was Donna. I found that out the way I found out a lot of things in those weeks. Carefully, indirectly, by paying attention to details I had previously ignored. She was his wife. They'd been married for 9 years. She worked as a pediatric occupational therapist and, from what I could find, had no idea what her husband had been doing on Tuesday and Thursday evenings for the past 5 months. I sat with that for a long time. The idea of her, a woman I had never met, living in a house 40 minutes away, just as blind as I had been, just as lied to. just as chosen by someone who had apparently decided that their vows were optional. I almost didn't reach out to her. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself I had enough to handle on my own. But something in me, the part that had always believed that the right thing and the hard thing are usually the same thing, couldn't leave her in the dark. I sent her a carefully worded message through a channel Marcus helped me set up. Nothing identifiable, just enough to let her know that a conversation might be worth having. I wasn't sure she'd respond. She responded within 2 hours. We met at a diner 30 miles from either of our neighborhoods on a Thursday afternoon. I recognized her immediately from the photographs I'd seen in Marcus's file. Tall, auburn-haired, with the kind of composed face that told me she'd already been doing her own suspecting for a while. She slid into the booth across from me and said, "How long?" before I'd even opened my mouth. I told her what I knew. She told me what she knew. By the end of the first cup of coffee, we had between us a picture neither of us wanted to be holding. What I had not anticipated was what she said near the end of our conversation. She set down her cup, looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and said, "There's something you should know. It's not my place, maybe, but I think you'd want to." She told me about a phone call she'd overheard 8 months earlier. Her husband on the back porch, voice low, thinking she was asleep. She hadn't understood it then. She understood it now. My wife's name. A mention of money. A mention of something being taken care of before I could find out. Find out what? I asked. Donna looked at me for a moment. "I think you need to talk to someone named Rachel." The name hit me like cold water. Rachel, a name from a chapter in my life I had closed, or believed I had closed, 22 years ago. A relationship that had ended before medical school consumed everything. Ended badly in the way that young relationships sometimes do. Not with cruelty, but with silence, with distance, with two people who had wanted different things at the wrong time. I had thought about her occasionally over the years the way you think about a road you didn't take, with a kind of neutral wondering. I sat with that name in that diner booth for a long time after Donna left. It took me 2 weeks to find Rachel. She wasn't hard to locate. She was living 40 miles north, working as a school counselor, had been for years. What was hard was deciding to knock on the door. I sat outside her house for 20 minutes the first time before driving away. The second time, I got out. She answered on the third knock. She looked older than I remembered, of course, and something about her eyes told me she had been waiting for this moment longer than I had. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. She invited me in. She made coffee neither of us drank, and then she told me about a decision she had made 21 years ago. A decision shaped in part, she said, by pressure from someone who had convinced her that telling me would ruin everything I was working toward, someone who'd been in both of our lives at the time and had apparently wanted to keep it that way. My wife had known Rachel. They had overlapped briefly in the same social circle, years before I ever introduced him, before my wife and I had even become serious, and when Rachel had discovered she was pregnant, when she had been deciding what to do, who to tell, my wife had been there, advising, steering. Rachel had a daughter, 20 years old. Her name was Lily. I drove home that night and sat in the driveway of my house for a long time, the house I had paid for, the marriage I had invested 17 years in, the woman inside who had known for 2 decades that somewhere there was a child with my name in her blood, and who had said nothing, who had done more than say nothing. I am not going to describe what those next several weeks felt like. Some things resist description. What I will say is that I made phone calls. I consulted a lawyer. I had a DNA test arranged, quietly and professionally. And when the results came back, I sat in my office and looked at a number, 99.97%, and felt something in my chest rearrange itself permanently. I had a daughter. Her name was Lily. She was 20 years old and studying environmental science at a university 3 states away, and had grown up believing her father was a man who hadn't wanted to be found. Rachel had not lied to her maliciously. She had told Lily that her father had not known about her, which was true, and that the circumstances were complicated, which was the understatement of 2 decades. What Rachel had not told her was the full shape of those circumstances, because she hadn't known all of it herself until recently. I reached out to Lily carefully. A letter first, then a call. She was cautious, which was reasonable. She was angry, which was also reasonable. She asked me hard questions and I answered them honestly, including the parts that made me look like someone who should have paid more attention years ago. We talked for 2 hours on that first call. At the end of it, she said, I need time. I told her she could have all the time she needed. She called back 4 days later. We met for the first time in person at a coffee shop halfway between her university and my city. I recognized her before she walked through the door. She moved like I move, with that slightly forward lean, like she's always about to solve something. She sat down across from me and looked at me the way young people look at you when they're deciding whether you're worth the risk of trusting. I told her everything. Not a curated version. Everything. She deserved that. By the end of 2 hours, she was crying in the way people cry when something they've carried for a long time finally has a place to go. I was not much better. We didn't hug that day. It was too soon for that. But when she stood up to leave, she turned at the door and said, "Same time next week." I had been planning the rest of it for a while by then. My wife and her affair partner had a shared professional event coming up, an annual foundation dinner that our hospital network hosted, the kind of evening where everyone dressed up and congratulated each other and pretended that the medicine was the point. Both of them would be there. Their spouses would be there. 400 people in a room, and the two of them comfortable in the belief that they had managed everything neatly. My lawyer had the papers ready. My accountant had the financial documentation organized. Marcus had provided me with everything I needed in a form that would be useful should any of it ever become relevant to a legal proceeding. I want to be honest. I had considered doing this quietly, signing the papers, handing them over at home, ending it without theater. Part of me still believes that would have been the more dignified path. But there was another part of me, the part that had spent 22 years not knowing he had a daughter because of deliberate interference, that felt a quiet, patient anger that needed to be witnessed. I arrived at the dinner alone. My wife had gone ahead with a group of her colleagues, which suited me fine. I found my table, exchanged pleasantries with the people around me, and spent the first hour of the evening being exactly what everyone expected me to be. Calm, gracious, present. Donna was seated 2 tables away. We did not acknowledge each other. The moment came after the main course. During the brief window before the program began, when people were standing, refreshing drinks, circulating. My wife was at the far end of the room near the bar, standing close to him in the way that people stand when they've practiced pretending not to be close. I crossed the room at a measured pace. I addressed him first, by name, loud enough to be heard by the people immediately around us, but not theatrical about it. I told him that Marcus had done excellent work. I watched his face go through several calculations very quickly. Then I turned to my wife. I told her that the lawyer's office had the signed documents ready for pickup Monday morning. I told her that the financial accounts had already been reviewed and separated per our prenuptial agreement, which she had signed 17 years ago and apparently forgotten about. I told her that I had spent the last several weeks getting to know our daughter. I watched her face at that word, and that Lily was remarkable, and that the 21 years of her life I had missed were something I intended to spend a long time making up for, in whatever way Lily would allow me to. I told her that I hoped she understood I was not angry so much as finished. Then I walked back to my table, said goodbye to the colleagues seated around me, and left. Donna filed her own papers the following week. We have stayed in contact, not in any complicated way, just in the way that two people stay in contact when they've been through something clarifying together. She is doing well. She has started, she tells me, to feel like herself again. Rachel and I have had several conversations, long ones. They have not been simple, and I am not going to pretend there isn't still a complicated tangle of old hurt and new understanding between us. But she is Lily's mother, and Lily matters more than any of it. So we are doing the slow work of becoming people who can be in the same room without the past filling up all the air. Lily visited me last month. She stayed for a long weekend. We went to a farmer's market on Saturday morning, and I showed her where I work, and she asked questions about surgery with that forward-leaning intensity that I now recognize as a family trait. On Sunday evening, she helped me cook dinner. She is a much better cook than I am, and we talked for 4 hours at the kitchen table about everything and nothing. When she left, she hugged me at the door. A real one, the kind that means something has been decided. I stood in the doorway after her car disappeared and thought about the word that keeps coming back to me lately, the one I keep turning over like a stone to see what's underneath. Not justice, exactly. Not even healing, though I think that's coming. The word is clarity. The feeling of finally standing on ground that is actually what it appears to be, solid and yours and real. I built my practice from nothing. I am, it turns out, still building. That part, I think, is going to be the best work of my life.